3 weeks after ankle surgery, my son drove me toward a rehab center. But during a freezing storm, he stopped on a deserted mountain road, dragged me from the truck, and threw my crutches into a flooded ditch. "No one's coming, old man," he said. My daughter-in-law smiled. "You'll never make it home." They left me there to die. 2 days later, they opened my front door and froze. I was already inside waiting. "Welcome to Silent Sweet Revenge. I'm incredibly grateful to have you here tonight." Before we dive into the final resolution, I'd love to know where you are watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Please note, this story contains creative elements crafted for entertainment and education. Any resemblance to actual names or settings is purely coincidental, but the life lesson remains profoundly useful. I need to tell you exactly where I was the night everything in my life cracked open. And I mean cracked open the way old timber does when the rot finally wins all at once, no warning, nothing left holding it together. I was not in a hospital bed. I was not in a warm house. I was face down on a mountain road in the pouring rain, 71 years old, 3 weeks out of surgery, with both my crutches gone and no way to stand up. Let me back up just enough to explain one thing, because it matters more than almost anything else I'm going to tell you tonight. 6 weeks before that night, I was in a car accident. Nothing dramatic about the how of it, a wet road, a curve I'd driven 100 times, and a pickup that came around it too wide. My left ankle took the worst of it. The surgeon used the word shattered, and he wasn't being poetic. 4 titanium screws, a plate, and a recovery order that was very specific. No weight on that foot. Not a little weight. None. Without my crutches, I could not stand. I could not take a single step. That is not an old man being dramatic. That is just the plain medical fact of where I was. And Caleb knew that. My son knew it better than anybody, because he had been in that house with me for 3 weeks, watching me navigate 12 feet of hallway, like it was the surface of the moon. He knew exactly what those crutches meant. Which is why when he grabbed them out of the back seat of his truck and threw them into the drainage ditch on the side of that mountain road, he knew precisely what he was doing. The rain was coming down in sheets. Not the gentle kind that makes you think of autumn. The kind that hits you flat, that gets inside your collar and down the back of your neck inside of 30 seconds. The kind that turns a dirt shoulder into running water. I could hear the current in that ditch already before I heard the crutches hit it. 2 hollow splashes, one right after the other, and then nothing. Caleb came around the front of the truck and stood over me. He was 42 years old and built like a man who had spent his life believing the world owed him something solid. And that night, every bit of that belief was right there on his face. "That's it, old man," he said. His voice was flat, almost bored. End of the line. My back was against the wet door of his truck, the only thing keeping me upright. I looked at my son, my boy, the one I had taught to throw a baseball in the backyard on Clement Street, and I said, "Caleb, don't do this." He tilted his head like I had said something faintly amusing. "We've been doing this for months, Dad. Tonight it's just finally finished. I'll freeze out here." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You know that. That's not really my problem anymore." He reached out and pulled my hand off the door handle, and my left leg buckled the moment I had nothing to hold on to, and the pain that shot up from my ankle was the kind that turns your vision white at the edges. I grabbed the side mirror, barely caught myself. From inside the truck, through the rain-blurred passenger window, I heard Jolene's voice, Caleb's wife, my daughter-in-law. Caleb. Just his name, but the way she said it wasn't a warning. It was a prompt. Like a stage director telling an actor to keep going. Caleb leaned close enough that I could see the water running in rivulets down his forehead. And he said, quiet and deliberate, the words landing one at a time. "Nobody's going to miss you. he said. "Nobody's coming. Not tonight. Not ever." My chest locked up, not from the cold, because I looked into his eyes when he said it, and there was nothing there that I recognized. Not anger, not guilt, not even contempt, really. Just arithmetic. He had run the numbers, and this was the answer he'd come to. The passenger window slid down. Jolene leaned across the seat, and her voice when it came was smooth and unhurried, like a woman wrapping up a business call. "Don't wait for help," she said, her voice completely calm. "There isn't any coming." The window went back up. Caleb walked around to the driver's side without looking at me again. The engine turned over. The truck pulled away, and I watched the red taillights blur in the rain and disappear around the curve, and then there was nothing. No sound but the rain and the water rushing in the ditch, and my own breathing, which was faster than I wanted it to be. I want to tell you what that moment was actually like, because I think people imagine it differently than it was. They imagine panic, probably. Shouting into the dark. Some kind of desperate scramble. But the truth is that the first thing I felt standing there holding on to nothing on the side of that mountain wasn't fear. It was something quieter. Something that went through the center of me like a blade made of ice. It was the absolute certainty that my son had planned this. Not tonight. Not on the drive up. He had planned it the way you plan a renovation or a business trip, calmly in advance with attention to detail. The road was isolated. The weather had given him cover. He knew I couldn't walk. He had timed this down to the last variable, and Jolene, I understood now in the freezing rain, that Jolene had been the one doing the arithmetic all along, and Caleb had been the one willing to carry it out. The fear came about 90 seconds later, right on schedule, because it absolutely should have. I was 71 years old, 3 weeks post-surgery, on a reconstructed ankle standing on a mountain road in a thunderstorm with no crutches, no phone signal, and no idea how far the nearest light was in either direction. The temperature was dropping. My jacket was already soaked through. I could feel the cold settling into my hands. I lowered myself down to the road inch by painful inch, and I reached into the ditch for my crutches. The current had them. I stretched until my shoulders screamed and my fingers touched nothing but fast-moving water and gravel, and I watched the darkness carry them the rest of the way out of reach. I lay there on the wet asphalt for a moment, and I did the math that a man does in a situation like that. How long before hypothermia becomes a real problem? How long before the ankle, already throbbing from the strain of the last 10 minutes, stops cooperating entirely? How many cars come down a road like this, at this hour in this weather? The numbers were not good. So I did what a man does when the numbers aren't good, and he intends to survive anyway. I started moving. You can't understand how a man ends up face down on a mountain road at 71 unless you know something about who he was before he got there. So bear with me because this part matters. My name is Russell Mercer. Most people who've known me longer than a week call me Russ. I was born in Harlan County, Kentucky in 1954, the second of 4 boys in a house that had 1 bathroom, 1 television, that got 3 channels on a good day, and a father who believed that complaining was a moral failing. It was not a soft upbringing, but it was honest, and I have never once been ashamed of it. I enlisted in the United States Army at 18 years old, which was 1972. And I want to be very clear about something right here at the start, because it will matter later in this story, and I don't want you sitting there building me into something I'm not. I was not a hero. I did not come home with a chest full of medals. I was not special forces, not an elite operator, not the kind of soldier whose story gets made into a movie. I was an ordinary private who did his job, followed orders, and tried not to get anybody killed, including himself. I served, I came home in one piece, And I will tell you that coming home in one piece was already more than some of the men standing next to me got to do, and I have never once taken that lightly. But those years in uniform gave me one thing that turned out to matter more than I could have known at 18. They gave me a commanding officer named Colonel Dwight Hatchet Hatch to everybody who served under him. I want you to hold onto that name, Hatch. Tuck it away somewhere, because he is going to come back into this story, and when he does, you are going to need to already know who he is. I got out of the Army in 1976 and went looking for work the way young men do when the uniform comes off and the world opens back up in front of them, a little sideways, a little unsure, moving on instinct more than plan. I landed on land, surveying almost by accident, tagged along with a crew doing boundary work in eastern Tennessee, and discovered that I was good at it. Good at the physical part of it, the walking, the hauling of equipment, the long days in every kind of weather. Good at the precision of it, too. A survey line is either right or it isn't. There is no almost in that work, and that suited the way my mind operated. I spent the next 40 years walking every kind of terrain this part of the country has to offer. Hillsides so steep you grab onto roots to keep from sliding. River bottoms in July that'll cook you in your own boots. Mountain ridges in February, where the wind has a personal grudge against you. My knees absorbed all of it year after year, and they did not complain until they finally did loudly and all at once, which is a story for another time. It was somewhere in those early working years that I met Lorraine. Lorraine Page. She was before she became Lorraine Mercer. She was 24 years old, working the front desk at a civil engineering firm in Knoxville, and she had the kind of calm, clear-eyed way of looking at a situation that I recognized immediately as something I did not have and badly needed. I asked her to dinner inside of a week. She made me ask twice before she said yes, which I would later understand was Lorraine's way of establishing right from the beginning that things were going to go at her pace and not mine. We were married in the spring of 1980. I was 26. She was 25. We had 41 years together, and I will say this about those 41 years: they were ordinary years. Not in a small way. In the best way. The kind of ordinary that means you came home to the same person every night, and that person was always genuinely glad you were there, and you were always genuinely glad to be there. I have known men who had extraordinary marriages full of passion and drama and grand gestures, and I have known men who had 40 years of that kind of quiet, glad ordinariness, and I know which kind I would choose every time. Lorraine made me a better man than I had any natural right to be. She was the one who noticed when I was getting stubborn about something I ought to let go. She was the one who remembered the names of my crew's wives and children. She was the one who, when I came home from a long job, tired and short-tempered, handed me a cup of coffee and said, "Go sit on the porch for 10 minutes before you talk to me," and was right every single time. Caleb was born in 1983. I was 29. I remember the exact weight of him the first time they put him in my arms, 6 pounds 9 ounces, and I remember thinking, standing in that delivery room in my work clothes because I had driven straight from a job site, that I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, and that I was going to have to figure it out fast. I coached his little league teams. I taught him to drive on the back roads outside of town, sitting in the passenger seat, with my hand braced on the dashboard, trying not to holler every time he misjudged a curve. I was not a perfect father. I worked long hours. I was stubborn in ways that made things harder than they needed to be. But I was there. Every single day I was there, and I still believe that being there counts for something. Somewhere along the way, though, Caleb started wanting things that I could not give him and would not have given him even if I could. Not things exactly. More like a version of life. The kind that comes with the right address and the right car, and the right table at the right restaurant, all of it right now, immediately, without the 20 years of hard work that usually stand between a man and those things. Lorraine used to shake her head about it in the quiet of our kitchen at night and say, "Russ, that boy is going to run himself into a wall one of these days, chasing something he can't even name." I told her she was being too hard on him. I was wrong about that. And then Lorraine got sick. I am not going to linger on this part, because it is the part of this story that belongs entirely to her, and she was a private woman who would not have wanted her illness turned into a set piece. What I will tell you is this: 8 months from diagnosis to the day I stood at her grave, and every one of those 8 months she was the bravest person in the room. She was 66 years old, and she handled the whole terrible business with exactly the same calm, clear-eyed steadiness she had brought to every hard thing in 41 years of marriage. After she was gone, the house felt like a place I was visiting. Every room had her fingerprints, her handwriting on the recipe cards in the kitchen drawer, the specific way she arranged the books on the shelf, the smell of her that was slowly, unstoppably fading from the bedroom. No matter how many times I told myself I wasn't going to notice it going. I rattled around in all of it 70 years old alone for the first time in my adult life, trying to figure out what a man does next when the person who always knew what came next is gone. I told myself I would get my footing, that grief passes, that a man gets back on his feet. I believed that right up until the morning Caleb pulled into my driveway with that particular look on his face, the one I did not yet have a name for, and told me he had a plan. It was a Tuesday morning in early April, 1 week after the surgeon put 4 screws into what was left of my left ankle, when Caleb's truck pulled into my driveway for the first time with that look on his face. I was in the recliner by the front window, the only comfortable position I had found, that kept the ankle elevated the way the doctor wanted when I heard the engine. I craned my neck and watched him get out, and the look I am talking about was this. It was the look of a man who has already decided something and is arriving to inform you of it. Not ask. Inform. I did not read it correctly at the time. I want to be honest about that. He let himself in with the spare key I had given him years ago, and the first thing he did was stand in my doorway and take in the whole room the way a contractor does when he's about to give you a quote. Slow, measuring cataloging. Dad. His voice was thick with something that sounded like worry. "You look terrible." "I had surgery a week ago," I said. "I'm not supposed to look like I just came back from a fishing trip." He crossed the room and crouched down in front of my chair, and he put his hand on my arm, and his face did something I had not seen it do in a long time. It softened. "You can't stay here alone," he said. "Not like this. It's not safe, and Lord help me." I felt something loosen in my chest when he said it, because the house had been so quiet since Lorraine passed. The kind of quiet that presses on you, that gets louder the longer you sit in it. And here was my boy crouched in front of me with his hand on my arm, telling me he was worried about me. "I'm managing," I said, but even I could hear that it came out thin. "You're not," Caleb said. "Dad, you can't even get to the bathroom on your own without those crutches. What happens if you fall? What happens at 2 in the morning when there's nobody here?" His jaw tightened. "I can't sleep knowing you're out here by yourself." The front door opened again before I could answer. A woman stepped in, carrying a casserole dish covered in foil, and the smell that came in with her chicken rosemary, something warm and homemade, hit me somewhere behind the sternum in a way I was not prepared for. Because Lorraine used to make a chicken casserole on Sunday nights. Same smell, same foil. This was Jolene, Caleb's wife. My daughter-in-law of 6 years, a woman with dark hair and a smile she deployed the way some people deploy an umbrella, efficiently at exactly the right moment. She set the dish on the kitchen counter and came into the living room wiping her hands on a dish towel. and she leaned down and kissed my cheek and said, "We've been so worried about you, Dad. You should have called us sooner." "I didn't want to be a bother," I said. She clicked her tongue. "Family isn't a bother." She straightened up and looked at Caleb, and something passed between them, quick, almost invisible, and then she smiled at me again. "We want you to come stay with us while you heal. Your room is already set up." I looked at the two of them standing there in my living room. My son, who had driven 40 minutes on a Tuesday morning because he was worried about me. My daughter-in-law, who had brought me a home-cooked meal. And I thought, this is what family looks like when you need it most. I thought that. I genuinely thought that. "I appreciate it," I said, "but this is my home. I'd rather heal here if it's all the same." Caleb nodded slowly, like he had been expecting that. "Then we'll come here," he said. "We'll move in with you, just until you're back on your feet." 3 days later, they brought 2 carloads of boxes. Jolene organized the spare bedroom with a speed and efficiency that I remember thinking was impressive, the kind of thoroughness that comes from having thought it through in advance. She had the system for everything: which cabinet the extra linens went in, which drawer in the kitchen was hers. She moved through my house with the confidence of someone who had already mapped it in her head. On the 4th evening, Caleb sat across from me at the kitchen table after dinner and slid a piece of paper across to me. "What's this?" I asked. "Just a form," he said. He had his elbows on the table, his posture easy, casual, the posture of a man discussing something routine. "A power of attorney. It lets me handle things on your behalf while you're laid up. Pay the bills, manage the accounts, deal with insurance so you don't have to worry about any of it while you're healing." I picked it up. It was 2 pages dense with legal language that blurred a little without my reading glasses. "Do I need a lawyer to look at this?" I asked. Caleb laughed easy warm. "Dad, it's a standard form. Nothing complicated. It just means if something comes up with the house or the accounts while you can't get around, I can take care of it for you. That's all it is." My hand was a little unsteady as I reached for the pen. Not from doubt, from the painkillers they had me on, which made everything feel slightly removed, like I was watching myself from the next room. I signed where he pointed. I did not read every line. Why would I? He was my son. And I was a tired old man sitting in a kitchen that smelled like Lorraine's cooking, and I was grateful not to be alone. I did not know, putting that pen down, that I had just handed Caleb the key to everything I had spent 40 years building. I did not know that the signature I had just put on that paper was not going to be the only signature bearing my name on documents I had never seen. I know now. But that night, I just knew I was glad he was there. The changes started small enough that I told myself for the first week or two that I was simply adjusting, that I had been living alone too long and had forgotten how to share a space, that the tightness I felt in my own chest some mornings when I woke up was just grief working its way through me the way grief does, slowly and without a schedule. Then came the morning I reached for my front door key and found it no longer fit the lock. I stood there in my own entryway, crutches under both arms, turning the key over in my fingers like I had somehow picked up the wrong one. I tried it again. The lock didn't budge. Caleb came down the stairs behind me, coffee mug in hand, and he set it the way you'd mention the weather. "Oh yeah, we changed the locks last week. Security upgrade, hang on." He set down his mug on the hall table, dug into his pocket, and held out a new key. Bright silver, freshly cut. My hand closed around it before my brain had fully caught up to what I was feeling. "You changed the locks on my house," I said, without telling me. I was going to mention it. He picked his mug back up, unbothered. "Old locks on these older homes are easy to bump. I read about it, just peace of mind, Dad. It's my house, Caleb, which is exactly why I wanted to make sure it was secure. He said it with such complete reasonableness that I stood there with the new key in my palm and couldn't find the thread I needed to pull to unravel it. He headed toward the kitchen. "Eggs," he called back. Jolene picked up the good bacon. I gripped the key so hard, the edge bit into my palm, and I made myself breathe. I made myself say, "It's a lock. It is just a lock." There are reasonable explanations for things, and you are a man who has always believed in reasonable explanations. That was what I told myself that morning. But my stomach, that deep, wordless part of a man that Lorraine used to call the one that knows, was already saying something different. The week after the lock, the mail changed. I noticed it on a Wednesday when I went to the box at the end of the driveway and found it empty. Inside on the kitchen counter was a stack of envelopes already opened, electric bill, water, the statement from my primary bank account. I set everything up for paperless billing. Jolene told me when I asked, her voice warm as fresh bread. "It's easier to manage online, Dad. You don't have to worry about all those papers piling up." She squeezed my arm with both hands and gave me that smile, the efficient one. "That's what we're here for." My bank statement. She had opened my bank statement. "Well, I said, and I had to work to keep my voice level because my throat had gone tight in a way I did not entirely understand. "I'd like to continue receiving my own mail." "Of course," she said, still smiling. "I'll change it back." She did not change it back. The following Monday, Caleb sat down across from me after breakfast and slid another form across the table. This one was from the bank. He explained it with the same easy confidence he'd used on the power of attorney. It was a joint account addition, he said, just so he could cover expenses quickly if something came up. Emergency access, he called it. Like having a spare tire. You hope you never need it, but you're glad it's there. My chest ached. Not my ankle, my chest. That specific ache of a man who wants to believe the person in front of him and cannot quite get there anymore. I signed it. God help me, I signed it. Because I was still trying to be reasonable. Still trying to be the kind of man who does not accuse his own son of something he cannot yet name. That night I heard them in the hallway outside my bedroom. I was not asleep. Sleep had been coming hard since the surgery, and their voices came through the door low and quick, the specific register of people who think they are being quiet. I caught Caleb's voice first. "The timeline needs to move up." Then Jolene, tighter, more clipped. "Not until the account transfer clears. We do it right. She's not going to notice for weeks." I thought. What she? Then Jolene again, barely above a whisper. "Keep him comfortable. Keep him grateful. That's all you have to do." The voices moved down the hall. I lay in the dark with my heart hammering against my ribs, staring at the ceiling. And I turned those words over one by one the way you turn over a stone you are not sure you want to look under. Keep him comfortable. Keep him grateful. My wife used to say that the most dangerous lies are the ones that look exactly like love. She said it about something else entirely, some neighbor's situation years ago, and I had nodded and moved on and filed it away without really understanding it. Lying there in the dark, in my own bedroom, in my own house that now had locks I hadn't chosen, listening to my son's voice disappearing down the hallway, I understood it for the first time all the way down to the bone. The thing in my stomach, the one that knows, had stopped asking questions. It had started keeping score. I did not sleep. I lay there until the house went quiet, and the clock on the nightstand read 2:47, and I stared at the ceiling, and I let myself ask for the first time the question I had been turning my back on for weeks. Not what are they doing, but how far have they already gone? Morning came in gray and thin through the front windows, the kind of light that does not so much illuminate a room as remind you that night is over. I had been awake since before 4. My ankle throbbed with the particular low persistence of a healing bone that has not yet decided to forgive you for what happened to it, and my mind had not stopped turning over those words I'd heard through the bedroom door. Keep him comfortable. Keep him grateful. I got my crutches from beside the bed and worked my way down the hall. The house was quiet. Caleb and Jolene's bedroom door still closed, no sound from inside. I moved into the living room, and that is when I stopped. The shelf above the fireplace was bare. I want you to understand what that shelf was. It was not decoration. It was not a collection of things that accumulate in a house the way clutter does mindlessly without intention. Every object on that shelf had been placed there by Lorraine or by the two of us together, and every one of them had a weight to it that had nothing to do with how much it actually weighed. There had been our wedding photograph in the oak frame her mother had given us. There had been the small brass carriage clock that sat on her side of the mantel for 30 years, the one her father had left her. There had been the blue ceramic vase she brought back from the only trip we ever took outside this country, a long weekend in Quebec City in 1994. The two of us splurging on a train ticket and a hotel room we could barely afford, and Lorraine carrying that vase wrapped in her sweater in her carry-on bag the whole way home, because she refused to check it. And there had been the music box, a little lacquered thing, pale green, that I had given her for our first anniversary, when I had almost no money and had saved for 3 months to buy it. She had kept it wound. Every Sunday morning for 40 years she wound it. The song it played was nothing famous, just a tune. But I had heard it every Sunday of my married life, and I had not heard it since she died, because I could not make myself open the lid. All of it was gone. The shelf was a blank rectangle of painted wood. My hands tightened on the crutches until my knuckles ached. The pain in my chest was not my ankle. It was something older and deeper, and it pushed up into my throat and burned there. And I had to breathe through my nose slow, the way the army taught me to control the things that want to come out of you at the wrong moment. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Caleb came into the room in a t-shirt and jeans, and he looked at me standing in front of the fireplace, and something moved across his face, quick calculating, before he settled on casual. "Morning, Dad. You're up early." "Where are they?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. He tilted his head. "Where are what?" "The things from this shelf." I turned to face him fully. "The clock, the photograph, the vase from Quebec, the music box your mother kept wound every Sunday for 40 years. My voice cracked on that last part, and I hated it, but I held his gaze. "Where are they, Caleb?" He exhaled slowly, the exhale of a man reaching for patience. "Dad, we went through some things while you were sleeping last week. The house needed to breathe. You've got so much stuff, and some of it was just, that was your mother's," I said, and my voice came out sharp enough that he stopped. "That was Lorraine's. You had no right to touch any of it." "Where is it?" Jolene appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, a dish towel in her hands, her expression arranged into something soft and concerned. "Dad, we donated a few things. We thought, donated." The word landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. "You donated your mother's music box. Some of it may have gone to—" Jolene started. "Stop." I held up one hand, and it was shaking not from weakness, from the effort of keeping my voice from doing something I would regret. "That vase came home from Quebec City in Lorraine's carry-on bag. She held it in her lap on the train. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She held it in her lap." My eyes burned, and I did not bother to hide it. "And you donated it." Caleb crossed his arms over his chest. "Dad, you can't keep living like a museum. Mom's been gone for over a year. You have to move forward at some point. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and something in me that had been trying very hard to stay warm went cold. Get out of this room, I said quietly. Both of you. Please. Jolene put her hand on Caleb's arm and they went. I heard their voices in the kitchen, low and close, and I turned back to the empty shelf, and I let myself feel the full weight of it, because there was no one watching and there was nothing left to hold back. The music box was gone. The vase was gone. 43 years of a life built with the woman I loved, and they had cleared it out in an afternoon and called it helping me move forward. I stood there in front of that fireplace with my eyes burning and my hands shaking on the crutches, and I made myself a promise. I was done asking questions and accepting whatever answer came back reasonable and smooth. Tomorrow morning, before either of them was awake, I was going to find out exactly what else they had done. I was up at 4:30 the next morning. Not because I had slept and woken, I had not slept at all. I lay in that bed, listening to the house breathe around me until the clock said it was late enough to move without making noise, and then I got my crutches, and I went to find out what I was dealing with. Caleb kept his files in the bottom drawer of the desk, in what had been my study, a room he had quietly taken over in the second week, moving his laptop and his papers in while I was doing my ankle exercises in the bedroom. The drawer was not locked. I remember thinking as I pulled it open that he had not locked it, because it had not occurred to him that I would look. That was how thoroughly he had decided I was not a threat. The first thing I found was a manila folder labeled in Caleb's handwriting, Mercer Estate Admin. My hands were steady when I opened it. I will give myself that much. The power of attorney was on top. 2 pages, the same document I had signed at the kitchen table, but with one difference that I had to look at twice before I fully understood what I was seeing. The signature on the bottom of page 2 was mine. My name in my handwriting. Except that I had not signed page 2. I had signed page 1. I was certain of it the way you are certain of your own face in a mirror, because a man knows the particular movement of his own hand, the way he makes his R, the slight leftward lean he's had since the 3rd grade. The signature on page 2 was close. It was very close. But it was not mine. My chest went tight and cold, the way a room does when you open a window in January. I set the folder down on the desk and breathed for a moment slowly and deliberately before I kept going. Behind the POA was a form from my bank, a beneficiary change on my primary savings account. The account Lorraine and I had built together over 30 years. The account I had always intended to leave to 3 charities she believed in. The new beneficiary listed was Caleb and Jolene Mercer. The signature authorizing the change was mine, or something that was meant to look like mine. Behind that was a letter from a real estate company I had never heard of, addressed to Caleb, confirming a property valuation appointment for my address. The letter was dated 3 weeks ago. It thanked Caleb for his inquiry and noted that the preliminary assessment would be ready within 10 business days. A property valuation on my house, requested by my son. Without a single word to me, I put everything back exactly as I had found it, folder in the drawer closed. My hands were not shaking. I want to be clear about that, because what I was feeling was not the trembling kind of thing. It was the other kind, the cold, settling kind, the kind that comes when a man stops being surprised and starts being certain. There is a difference between those 2 things, and I have lived long enough to know which one is more dangerous. I made my way to the kitchen, and I sat down at the table and I picked up my phone. It was 5:15 in the morning, which meant I could not call anyone yet. But I could write. I found the number for Warren Stills, the attorney who had handled Lorraine's estate and who had drawn up our wills 12 years ago. I had not spoken to Warren in over a year. I composed a text message, slowly choosing each word. Warren. It's Russell Mercer. I need to see you today if at all possible. There are documents I need you to look at. It is urgent. I set the phone down on the table and looked at the window, which was just beginning to go gray with the first hint of morning. Down the hall, I heard Caleb's alarm go off, the muffled thump of him silencing it, the sound of movement in the bedroom. In a few minutes, he would come down those stairs and walk into this kitchen and pour himself a cup of coffee and say, "Morning, Dad," in that easy, unbothered way he had, and I would say, "Morning," back, and neither of us would say a word about what was in that bottom drawer, because I needed him not to know what I knew. Not yet. Not until I had sat across from Warren Stills and understood the full shape of what had been done to me. So when Caleb came through the kitchen doorway in his socks, yawning, running a hand through his hair, and said, "You're up early again, Dad. You feeling okay?" I looked up at him and I made my face do the thing it needed to do. "Ankle kept me up," I said. "Nothing new." He nodded satisfied and reached for the coffee. And I sat there at my own kitchen table watching my son pour himself a cup from my coffee maker in my kitchen, in my house. And I kept every single thing I was feeling exactly where it needed to stay, behind my eyes, in my chest, out of my face. And I waited for Warren Stills to call me back. 2 days went by. Warren Stills had not called back yet. His assistant said he was in court and would reach me by end of week. I moved through those 2 days carefully, saying little, watching more, keeping my face arranged into something that looked like a tired old man healing his ankle, and nothing more. Caleb seemed satisfied with that. Jolene seemed satisfied with that. And that, I had come to understand, was exactly the problem with both of them. They were very easily satisfied when they thought they were getting what they wanted. On the third morning, Caleb came downstairs in a good mood. Not his regular mood. A specific elevated mood, the kind a man has when he is about to deliver news he has been sitting on and can no longer keep to himself. He poured his coffee, he poured mine without being asked, and he sat down across from me at the kitchen table and folded his hands and smiled. "Dad," he said, "I want to talk to you about something. Something good." My stomach dropped 2 inches. In my experience, when someone tells you they have something good to talk about, and they look like that when they say it, it is never good for you. It is good for them. He reached into the pocket of his jacket, already dressed. I noticed, already ready to go somewhere, and he slid a brochure across the table toward me. Glossy, full color. A photograph of a stone building surrounded by pine trees, a paved walking path, flower beds along the front. The name across the top read, "Pineview Recovery and Wellness Center." "It's a recovery facility," Caleb said, leaning forward on his elbows. "Specialists, physical therapy, the whole setup. Way better equipment than what we can do here for your ankle. They've got a heated therapy pool, Dad. You'd be doing real rehab, not just waiting around the house." I picked up the brochure. I turned it over. The address on the back was in a county I barely knew, the far side of the mountain range, 2+ hours from everything and everyone I had spent my life near. I looked at the photographs. I looked at the amenities listed on the inside panel. And then in the lower left corner of the back page, in print, just small enough that you would miss it if you were not looking for it, I found the line that told me everything. Pineview Recovery and Wellness Center. Specializing in long-term care and assisted living services. Assisted living. Not a rehabilitation center. Not a short-term recovery facility. Assisted living. I set the brochure down on the table flat, and I looked at my son. "This is a nursing home, Caleb." He shifted in his seat. "Dad, that's a reductive way to—" "The back panel says assisted living." I tapped it with one finger. "That is a nursing home. But it has a rehabilitation wing," he said. "You'd be in the rehab section." How long? I asked. He paused just a half second too long. As long as you need. Jolene appeared from the kitchen doorway and leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching. She did not sit down. The woman never sat down when she was positioned. The surgeon told me 6 to 8 more weeks on crutches. I said, keeping my voice even, keeping it slow and deliberate the way you do when you need every word to land exactly right. After that, I walk on my own. I do not need an assisted living facility, Caleb. I need 6 more weeks, and then I walk out of here on 2 feet. Dad. Caleb's voice shifted, still controlled, but something harder underneath it now, something that did not bother pretending quite as much. You're 71 years old. You can't manage this house alone. You've barely been able to get to the bathroom on your own, because I just had surgery. My voice went tight, and I felt the heat rise into my face. That is what recovery looks like, Caleb. It is temporary. This, I pushed the brochure back across the table toward him, is not temporary, and we both know it. Jolene uncrossed her arms and walked to the table and put her hand on the brochure, the way you put your hand on something you already own. We just want what's best for you, Dad, she said. Her voice was smooth and patient, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed this. You deserve real care, real support. And what I deserve, I said, and my hands gripped the armrests of my chair because I needed them to grip something, is to be asked. Not told. Asked. I looked at Caleb hard. You already signed paperwork for this place, didn't you? The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the half-second calculation I could see happening behind his eyes. We made some preliminary arrangements, he said, just to hold a spot. Without my signature. Dad, without my signature. Each word landed separate and heavy. Caleb stood up from the table, and his chair scraped back hard on the floor, and his jaw set in a way I had not seen since he was 15 years old, and I had grounded him for something he did not think he deserved to be grounded for. It's already decided, Dad, he said. We're going this weekend. It's the right thing for everyone. The right thing for everyone. I sat in that chair with my heart hammering and my hands shaking against the armrests, and I looked at my son, my boy, standing in my kitchen, telling me that a decision about where I would live had already been made without me, and I understood with a cold and total clarity that arguing was not going to change anything. But I also understood something else, something I had not said out loud to anyone yet. Warren Stills had not called back. I did not yet have what I needed. And sometimes I had learned in 71 years, the smartest thing a man can do when the ground is shifting under him is not to fight the shift, but to stay on his feet long enough to find solid ground. So I said nothing more. I let Caleb believe he had won, and I began counting down the days. Saturday came before Warren called back. I had checked my phone every hour since Thursday morning. Nothing. His assistant said he was still tied up in a deposition that had run long. End of week, she had said. End of week had come and gone. And now it was Saturday, and Caleb was standing in my bedroom doorway at 2 p.m. with his keys in his hand and that look on his face that said the conversation was already over. Bags in the truck, he said. Whenever you're ready. I had packed 1 bag. Not because I intended to stay anywhere, I did not intend to stay anywhere, but because I had decided on Friday night, lying awake with my phone on the nightstand, that I needed to be in that truck. I needed to hear what they said when they thought it was finished. I needed to understand the full shape of what I was dealing with before I could fight it. And the only way to see the full shape of something is sometimes to let it move. So I got my crutches. I got my bag. And I got into the back seat of Caleb's truck with every intention of being the most cooperative, most unthreatening, most forgettable passenger he had ever driven anywhere. The first 40 minutes were quiet. Not peaceful, quiet, loaded quiet, the kind that sits between people who have things to say and are choosing not to say them yet. Jolene rode in the front passenger seat, her phone in her hand, scrolling through something with her thumb. Caleb drove with both hands on the wheel eyes forward, the radio off. Outside the windows, the town gave way to highway, and the highway gave way to the two-lane road that started climbing into the mountains, and the sky ahead of us had gone the color of a bruise. I watched the road signs. I had driven these roads for 30 years. Survey work took me up through these mountains dozens of times, and I knew the route to Pineview, and I knew we were on it. And I knew that once we crossed the county line, the distance back to my house became something a man on crutches could not manage alone. Caleb, I said, keeping my voice light, conversational. What's the setup at this place? Do I have my own room? Private room, he said, not turning around. You'll like it. And I can come home for visits weekends. A beat of silence. Then Jolene, without looking up from her phone. Let's get you settled first, Dad. Then we'll figure out the details. The details. That was when the last warm thing in me went cold. I watched the trees close in on both sides of the road. The elevation was rising, I could feel it in my ears, and the first drops of rain hit the windshield slow at first, and then faster, and Caleb turned on the wipers and they swept back and forth in that rhythm that is somehow more isolating than silence. Your mother used to love this drive, I said. Caleb's hands tightened on the wheel, just slightly, just enough that I saw it. The fall colors up here, I continued, and my voice was steady even though my chest ached with the truth of what I was saying. She used to make me pull over at the overlook up past the ridge. Every year. Said it was the best view in the state. My throat tightened, but I kept going because I needed him to hear it. She would have been 70 this September. Dad. Caleb's voice came out clipped. She would not recognize what you're doing right now, I said quietly. You know that? You know your mother, and you know she would not recognize this. The truck swerved. Not a big swerve, a sharp, involuntary jerk to the right that put us half onto the gravel shoulder before Caleb corrected. Jolene grabbed the door handle and said, Caleb, in a voice that was half warning and half something else, something tighter. Caleb pulled the truck fully onto the shoulder and stopped. The gravel crunched under the tires, and then everything was still except for the rain hammering the roof and the wipers still going back and forth like nothing had changed. He sat there with both hands on the wheel and his shoulders rising and falling with his breathing, and I watched the back of his neck go red. Don't, he said. His voice had dropped to something low and rough that I had never quite heard from him before. Don't bring her into this. She is already in this, I said. Every decision you have made since you walked into my house is something she would have. That I said don't. He turned around, and the look on his face, I have lived 71 years, and I want to tell you that the look on my son's face in that moment was the first time in all those years that I felt something close to afraid of him. Not the rage of it, the coldness underneath the rage. You want to talk about Mom? His voice cracked and then hardened over immediately, like ice forming on water. Mom is gone. She doesn't get a vote. And honestly, Dad, honestly, neither do you. Not anymore. Jolene put her hand on his arm. Not to stop him. To steady him. There was a difference. Caleb yanked his door open. The rain came in. He stepped out into it, and he came around the front of the truck, and I watched him through the rain-streaked windshield. and I knew the way you know certain things in your body before your mind has caught up, that what was coming next was not going to be a conversation. Before I tell you what Caleb did next and what he did next, is something no father should ever have to say about his own son. I need to know if you are still with me. If you have ever watched someone you loved show you exactly who they really are, drop a "still here" in the comments. Just those 2 words. I read every single one. One more thing before we continue: some stories on this channel are shaped with fictional elements to protect the people involved. If that is not something you are comfortable with, this is your moment to step away, no hard feelings. But if you are staying, hold on tight. What happens on that road next is something I have carried with me every single day since. He came around the front of the truck the way a man walks when he has already made his decision, and the only thing left is the doing of it. Not fast, not slow, just steady, the way you walk toward something you have been building toward for a long time. He opened my door. "Out," he said. I looked up at him from the back seat. The rain was coming down behind him in curtains, and the light from the truck's interior caught his face, and what I saw there was not anger anymore. Anger burns. What was on Caleb's face had gone past burning. It had gone cold and settled, and that was worse. That was so much worse. "Caleb," I kept my voice even, "think about what you're doing." "I've been thinking about it for months." He reached in, grabbed my left arm above the elbow, and pulled. "I want to tell you what that felt like, not to make you feel sorry for me, but because I think it matters that you understand exactly what kind of man my son revealed himself to be in that moment. I am 71 years old. I had 4 screws in my left ankle, and strict orders from my surgeon not to put weight on it. I weighed 162 pounds, and I had the upper body strength of a man who had spent 40 years carrying survey equipment up mountainsides, which is to say, I was not weak, but I was also not 42, and I was not braced for it. When Caleb pulled, I came out of that seat in a way that had nothing dignified about it, half falling, grabbing at the doorframe with my free hand, my left foot swinging out and hitting the running board, and the pain that shot up my leg was the white-hot kind that erases everything else for a full second. I grabbed the doorframe with both hands and held on. "Stop," I said, and my voice came out ragged from the pain. "Caleb, stop." He pried my right hand off the doorframe, finger by finger. Then he got both hands under my arms, and he dragged me the rest of the way out into the rain, and I came down hard on my right knee on the wet gravel shoulder, and the impact went straight up through my hip. And I heard myself make a sound I did not intend to make, a short, sharp grunt of pain that I could not swallow fast enough. He let go. I was on my knees on the shoulder of a mountain road in the rain, scrabbling to keep from going face down, my left leg held out to the side, because putting it down was not something I was willing to do. "The crutches," I said. "Caleb, I cannot stand without them." He reached back into the truck. He grabbed both crutches. I heard them scrape across the back seat, and he turned and he threw them. Not down onto the road, into the drainage ditch that ran along the shoulder, the one that had a good 6 inches of fast-moving water in it from the rain that had been coming down all evening. 2 splashes, quick and separate, and then the sound of the current taking them, and then nothing. My chest seized. Not from fear, from the understanding of it. He had not lost his temper and done something reckless. He had thought about where to throw them. He had thrown them into the water deliberately, because water moves things, and things that move are things you cannot retrieve. I looked up at my son from the gravel rain hitting my face, and I said, "Caleb, please." He crouched down so we were level, and he put his face close enough to mine that I could see the rain running in lines down his forehead, and he said low and flat and absolutely certain, "If you disappear tonight, nobody's gonna notice. Nobody's coming to save you, old man. Nobody." Every word landed like a separate blow. Not because they were cruel, though they were cruel, but because of the steadiness behind them. He was not saying it in rage. He was saying it the way you state a fact you have already verified. The passenger window came down. Jolene leaned across the center console, and her voice when it came was the smoothest thing I had heard all day, unhurried, untroubled, almost gentle, the way a person sounds when they are completely comfortable with what is happening. "Don't expect anyone to come looking for you," she said. She held my gaze for exactly 1 second. "We won't." The window went back up. Caleb stood. He brushed the wet off the knees of his jeans like a man who has just finished a task that got his hands dirty. He walked back around to the driver's side, and he got in, and the door closed, and the engine revved, and the headlights swung back onto the road, and I watched the taillights go red and bright, and then shrink, and then disappear around the curve ahead. And then there was nothing on that road but the rain and the dark and the sound of the water in the ditch carrying my crutches away into it. I knelt there in the gravel for a moment that felt much longer than it was. The first thing I felt was not fear. I want to be honest about that, because it surprises even me when I think back on it. The first thing, the very first thing, before the fear, before the cold, before the arithmetic of survival, was a grief so complete and so sudden that it took my breath the same way a plunge into cold water does. Not grief for myself. Grief for the boy I had once held in a delivery room for the Little League games and the driving lessons and the 40 years of trying grief for whatever it was that had happened somewhere in the growing up of him that I had missed or misread or simply failed to prevent. Then the fear came, right on schedule. Because I was kneeling on a mountain road in the dark in the rain with no way to stand up, and the temperature had dropped 15 degrees since we left the house, and my left ankle was screaming, and I was completely alone. I looked toward the ditch. One last attempt. I stretched out as far as I could reach, and I put my hand in the cold running water, and I felt nothing but gravel and current. They were gone. I pulled my hand back. I looked at the road ahead of me, wet and dark and absolutely empty in both directions. And I made a decision. The decision was this: I was not going to die on this road. That sounds simple. It sounds like the kind of thing a person says in a movie, clean and resolved. But I want you to understand what it actually meant. Kneeling there in the gravel in the dark, with the rain coming down and the cold working its way through my jacket and into my shoulders. It was not a heroic decision. It was not even a brave one, not really. It was the only decision available to me, and I made it the way you make any decision when there is only one option left. Not with inspiration, but with the particular stubbornness of a man who has spent his entire life refusing to be told what he cannot do. I got my hands flat on the road surface. I pushed. Getting upright on one leg without anything to hold on to is harder than it sounds, and it sounds hard already. I got to my right knee first, then I got my right foot flat on the road, and I pushed up from there. And for one teetering second, I was standing on one leg in the pouring rain on the shoulder of a mountain road in the dark, 71 years old, and then my right knee buckled from the effort of it, and I went back down to my hands, and I said something out loud that I will not repeat here, but that Lorraine would not have approved of. "All right," I said to nobody. "All right, that's fine." I could not walk. So I would crawl. I want to be precise about the mechanics of this, because it matters to the story, and I think you deserve to understand it. My left ankle was the one with 4 titanium screws in it. My left ankle was the one the surgeon had said no weight on. My left ankle was at that moment letting me know in very specific terms exactly how unhappy it was about the last 20 minutes. But my hands were fine. My right knee was fine, bruised from the gravel, but operational. My right foot was fine. What I could do what I did was put my weight on my hands and my right knee, hold my left leg out straight behind me and move forward that way. 3 points of contact on the road, one leg trailing. Slow. Painful in the hips and the wrists after the first few minutes. But forward. I moved along the shoulder, staying out of the soft mud at the edge where my hands would sink. The pavement was better wet and cold and hard, but solid. I found a rhythm after a while. Hands forward, knee forward, drag the left leg, pause. Hands forward, knee forward, drag, pause. The rain did not stop. The temperature did not rise. "You're all right, Russ," I said out loud because I needed to hear a voice and mine was the only one available. "You're moving. Moving is living. Keep moving." Lorraine would have laughed at me talking to myself on a mountain road. She would have laughed, and then she would have said in that brisk, practical way she had, "Well, stop narrating and go faster then." And the thought of her saying it, the absolute vividness of hearing her voice in my head, the exact cadence of it, made my eyes burn so badly that I had to stop for a moment and breathe through it. "Not yet," I told her, or told myself, or told the rain. "Not yet. I'll cry later. I've got somewhere to be." I do not know how far I had gone. The darkness made distance impossible to judge, and the cold had begun doing things to my sense of time. 20 minutes, perhaps more. I had passed one reflector post and was looking for the next one, using them as markers, telling myself that each one was progress, that each one was a small victory, that a man who can get from one reflector post to the next can get from that one to the one after it. 4 years of survey work had taught me to break impossible distances into manageable segments, and I applied that now to the business of crawling up a mountain road in the rain, because the mind will accept what the body refuses if you give it small enough pieces. My right wrist had started to ache in a deep, grinding way that told me the cartilage was unhappy. I stopped and rested it, and switched to my forearm for a stretch which was slower but easier on the joint. My jacket was soaked through entirely. I could feel the cold water against my skin every time I moved a cold that had gone past uncomfortable into the kind that starts making decisions for you if you let it. And then, somewhere in the back of my mind, in the part of it that was still running clearly, despite everything, a name came up. Hatch. I had not thought of Colonel Dwight Hatchett in years, not in any real present tense way. He had been a part of my life that belonged to a completely different chapter 50 years back, a chapter that had closed and stayed closed the way most chapters do when life carries you forward. But lying face down on that road in the dark, something in my mind went looking for the people who had never once left me behind, and it found him. "You do not leave your people," he used to say back when we were young, and he was our commanding officer, and those words meant something specific and tactical. "Not in the field, not in any field. You go back for them. Every time. No exceptions." I had not thought about whether I believed that still as a general principle, as a way of moving through the world. I had just assumed the world worked that way, or had before the last few months. I lifted my head. Down the road, far away, so far away it might have been wishful thinking, something moved through the dark. A light. Low and yellow, coming slow around the bend above me. I stopped breathing. I watched it, and it grew, and it was real, and my heart slammed against my ribs so hard, I felt it in my throat, and I started doing the only calculation that mattered, how much was left in me, and whether it was enough to get myself seen. I had maybe 30 seconds. That was the calculation I had run in my head before the thought had even finished forming. 30 seconds from when those headlights came around the bend to when they would either see me or they wouldn't either slow down or they wouldn't either stop or they would pass me and keep going and take whatever warmth and hope they carried with them off into the dark. I got my hands flat on the road. I pushed with everything I had left in my arms, got my right foot under me, and I stood up. One leg, 71 years old, soaked to the skin, shaking from cold and pain and the effort of the last, however long it had been, since Caleb drove away. I stood up on one leg in the middle of that mountain road, and I held both arms up over my head, and I waved them wide and slow and impossible to miss, because a man waving his arms in the middle of a road in the rain is either someone who needs help or something to be afraid of, and I needed to be absolutely clear about which one I was. The headlights slowed. My heart lurched so hard I nearly lost my balance. "Stop," I said out loud, just the word, just into the rain, like saying it could help. "Please stop." The truck stopped. It was an old pickup, domestic, dark-colored, the kind that has been driven hard for many years, and maintained with the quiet stubbornness of someone who believes in finishing what they start. The engine idled. For one terrible second, nobody got out, and I thought they're going to decide I'm a problem and drive around me. People do that. People decide not to get involved. Then the door opened. A man climbed out. He moved the way certain men move when they are old, not slow exactly, not careful exactly, but deliberate, each movement considered, nothing wasted. He was not tall. He had never been tall even when I knew him, but he had always moved like a man who did not need height to take up the space he occupied. He came toward me through the rain with his head down and his collar up, and when he got within 10 feet of me, he raised his face and the headlights caught it. "Easy now," he said. "Easy. What in the world are you doing all the way out here, friend?" His voice. I cannot explain to you what it is to hear a voice you have not heard in 50 years and know it in the first syllable. Not recognize it, know it. The way you know the smell of your childhood home or the weight of a tool you used every day for decades. It bypasses the brain entirely and goes somewhere older and deeper, and what comes back up is not a memory, but a certainty. He got close enough for the light to reach my face. He stopped walking. His chin came up. "Russ." The word came out barely above a whisper, rough with something I had never heard in his voice when I was 19 years old, and he was my commanding officer. Something that sounded almost like it hurt. "Russell Mercer." My throat closed entirely. I opened my mouth, and what came out was not words. It was just his name broken in half by something I could not stop, Hatch. And then Colonel Dwight Hatchett. 78 years old, not a big man anymore. Hair gone white and face gone deep with lines crossed the last few feet between us, and got his shoulder up under my arm before my right leg could give out, and he held on, and I grabbed onto him with both hands, and for a long moment I just held on. "I've got you," he said low and steady right next to my ear. "I've got you, Russ. You're all right. You hear me? You're all right." I was crying. I want to be honest about that. Not quietly, not politely, the kind of crying that a man does when he has been holding something back for so long that the moment the holding stops, everything comes at once. I was crying and shaking and gripping on to this 78-year-old man on the side of a mountain road in the rain, and he held on without flinching, without pulling back, without doing anything other than keeping his shoulder solid under my arm and his voice low and steady in my ear. "Let's get you up into the truck," he said. "Come on now, one step. I've got you." He got me to the passenger door. He got it open. He got me up onto the seat with a kind of careful, methodical strength that had nothing to do with physical power and everything to do with a man who had spent his life figuring out how to get things done with what was available. He went around to the back, came back with a wool blanket, old dark green, the military kind, that never fully softens no matter how many times you wash it, and he spread it over my shoulders. Then he got in on his side, turned the heater all the way up and looked at me. "Tell me," he said. "All of it." So I did. I told him about Caleb and Jolene moving in, about the locks and the accounts and the documents I had found at 4 in the morning, about the brochure and the argument and the truck pulling onto the shoulder of this road. I told him about the crutches going into the ditch. I told him what Caleb had said word for word, and I told him what Jolene had said. And I watched Hatch's face as I talked. He did not interrupt me once. He did not make sounds of sympathy or horror. He just listened with the particular quality of attention that I had first noticed in him 50 years ago. The kind that makes a person feel that every word they are saying is being received and weighed and held. And as I talked, his face changed, not dramatically, not with visible emotion, but in the way a sky changes before weather, slowly, deeply, going from open concern into something quieter and harder and far more deliberate. When I finished, he sat forward, both hands on the wheel, looking through the rain-streaked windshield for a long moment. Then he turned to me and said, "Where's your house, Russ? Not the place they were taking you. Your house." "Clover Mill Road," I said. "About 40 minutes back down." He nodded, once put the truck in gear, and turned around. The heater blew warm air across my shins, and the wool blanket held the chill at bay, and the rain on the windshield softened as we came down off the upper elevation, and somewhere in the first 10 minutes of that drive I stopped shaking. Not all at once, gradually, the way warmth comes back into a body that has been cold for a long time from the inside out, slow and careful and real. Hatch drove the way he did, everything without hurry, without waste. Both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. He did not fill the quiet with talk. He never had. That was one of the things I remembered about him from 50 years ago. The thing that had set him apart from every other officer I served under. He understood that silence between two people who trust each other is not emptiness. It is just rest. After a while I said, "You live up here now." 12 years, he said. "Little place off Garnet Ridge Road. 20 acres a creek and nobody bothering me much." The corner of his mouth moved. "Until tonight." "I'm sorry," I said, "for being on your road. Don't apologize for that." His voice went flat and serious. "Don't ever apologize for that." I looked out the passenger window at the dark trees going past, and I thought about what it meant that this particular man had come down this particular road on this particular night, and I could not find a word for it that did not sound like something Lorraine would have said. She was the one who believed in that kind of thing, the unseen hand that puts the right person on the right road at the right moment. I had spent most of my life being agnostic about it. Sitting in that truck, wet and alive, I felt the agnosticism loosening its grip. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You can ask me anything, Russ. Why were you out tonight in this weather?" He was quiet for a moment. "Hardware store closes at 7, he said. "Needed chain for the gate latch. Been putting it off for 2 weeks. He shook his head slowly. 2 weeks, I put that off. My throat tightened again, and I had to look out the window until it passed. I want to tell you who Dwight Hatchett was, because I do not think you can fully understand what happened that night without knowing the shape of the man behind the wheel. When I met him, I was 19 years old and scared in the specific way that young men are scared when they have volunteered for something larger than themselves and are only now beginning to understand what that actually means. Hatch was 26 already, an officer already, the kind of man who seemed to have been born knowing what he was for. He knew every one of our names, not as a technique, not as a leadership strategy. He just knew them the way you know the names of people who matter to you. He knew where each of us was from. He knew which of us had family waiting and which of us did not. He noticed when a man was struggling before the man knew it himself, and he did something about it quietly, without making a production of it, without ever letting the man feel diminished for needing the help. That conviction, you do not leave your people, not in the field, not anywhere, had not been a rule he recited. It had been a description of himself, and sitting in his truck wrapped in his blanket, I understood for the first time that he had always intended to remain that man for as long as he was breathing. "You saved my life tonight," I said. "I gave you a ride," he said. "Hatch." He glanced over at me, and his eyes in the dashboard light were the same eyes I remembered, steady dark, not given to sentimentality, but not immune to it either. "All right," he said. "Maybe a little more than a ride." I would not have lasted the night. He did not argue with that. He nodded once, looking back at the road. "I know," he said. "I could see that when I got out of the truck." We rode in quiet for a while after that. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time we hit the valley road, and the lights of the first houses started appearing through the trees, warm and yellow in the dark. "What are you going to do?" Hatch asked. "Call the sheriff," I said. "Call my lawyer. And then sit in my own chair and wait for my son to come home." Hatch nodded slowly, like he was running the plan, and found it sound. "You want company while you wait?" I looked at him. 78 years old, chain for a gate latch on the back seat, a man with no particular reason to involve himself in someone else's trouble. "I'd be grateful for it," I said. "Then that's settled." He turned his eyes back to the road. "Which street?" "Clover Mill. Third left after the gas station." He took the turn without slowing down. He knew exactly where he was going, and for the first time since Saturday afternoon, so did I. Hatch got me up the front walk, one careful step at a time. His shoulder under my arm, neither of us saying much, because neither of us needed to. He found the spare key where I told him under the lip of the second porch step, where it had been for 11 years, and he got the door open and got me inside, and got me into my chair, the big recliner by the front window that I had occupied for the better part of 3 weeks. He turned on every lamp in the room. I do not know why that particular detail has stayed with me, but it has. He did not turn on one lamp. He went around the room and turned on all of them, and the house went from dark and empty to lit up and present, and something in my chest eased slightly at the sight of it. "Phone," he said. I pointed to the side table. He handed it to me and then went to the kitchen, and I heard him opening and closing cabinets with the quiet efficiency of a man assessing an unfamiliar space, and a minute later he came back with a glass of water and set it beside me without comment. I called the sheriff's department first. The dispatcher who answered had one of those voices that stays level no matter what you tell them, trained level, professional level, and I was grateful for it because it meant I could be precise without having to manage her reaction at the same time. I told her my name and my address. I told her I was a 71-year-old man with a surgically reconstructed ankle who had been removed from a vehicle against my will on Route 9 Mountain Road, that my mobility aids had been thrown into a drainage ditch, that I had been left alone in the rain without the ability to walk, and that I had a witness who had found me and brought me home. "Are you injured, sir?" she asked. "My ankle took some strain," I said. "I need a deputy, not an ambulance." "I'm sending someone now. Can you stay on the line?" "I'll be here." Hatch sat in the chair across from me. He had found himself a glass of water, too, and he held it in both hands and watched me with that attentive, unhurried steadiness that I had first encountered when I was 19 years old and had never entirely forgotten. The second call was to Warren Stills. It was past 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, which meant I got his voicemail, which was exactly what I expected. I kept my voice even, and I kept it brief. This was Russell Mercer. I needed to see him first thing Monday morning. It was urgent, and it was not something that could wait, and I had documents I needed him to examine in person. I left my number twice and hung up. "Your lawyer?" Hatch asked. 40 years of documents to untangle, I said. POA accounts, beneficiary changes. Some of it with signatures that aren't mine. Hatch's jaw tightened. Not dramatically, just a small controlled movement, the kind that means a great deal on a face that does not waste expression. "They forged your signature." "On at least 2 documents," I said. "Maybe more." He set his glass down on the side table with a careful, deliberate click. "All right," he said, and the 2 words had a weight to them that I found steadying in a way I could not entirely explain. Not anger. Something older and more purposeful than anger. "The deputy is going to want your statement," I said. "What you found on the road. Where exactly, what condition I was in, what time. I know how statements work, Russ." He said it without impatience, almost gently. "I'll tell them exactly what I found. Every detail." We waited. The house was warm and bright, and mine and outside the rain had thinned to a steady drizzle that tapped against the front windows like something asking to be let in. I looked at the room around me, at the walls, and the furniture and the carpet that Lorraine had picked out in 2003, and that I had always meant to replace and somehow never had, and I was fiercely, almost painfully glad to be sitting in it. "Hatch," I said. "Yeah, they went to dinner." My voice came out steadier than I felt saying it. "After they left me on that road, they went to a restaurant." "I don't know that for certain yet, but I know it. The way you know certain things." Something moved across his face, a brief controlled flash of something that, in a less disciplined man, would have been fury. In Hatch it lasted about a second, and then it was gone, replaced by that same quiet, deliberate look. "Then they'll have a receipt," he said. "And a timestamp." That's what I thought too. The deputy arrived at 20 past 10. He was younger than I expected, mid-30s, compact, with a notepad already out before he was fully through the door. He introduced himself as Deputy Carl Briggs. Shook my hand, shook Hatch's, looked around the room once the way trained people do, and then sat down across from us and said, "Mr. Mercer, why don't you start from the beginning?" I started from the beginning. I told it the same way I had told it to the dispatcher, precise, chronological, no editorializing. The truck, the road, the crutches in the ditch. The words Caleb had said, and the words Jolene had said. Hatch gave his statement after mine, where he had found me, what condition I was in, what time he had found me. Deputy Briggs wrote steadily and did not interrupt either of us. When we were done, he looked up from his notepad and said something that told me for the first time all evening that what I had set in motion was going to hold. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "what you're describing, leaving a vulnerable adult in a dangerous situation without the means to seek help, that's a serious offense in this state. With a corroborating witness and your medical documentation, we have more than enough to move forward." He closed his notepad. "I'm going to need the vehicle description and your son's full name and address." My hands were steady when I gave them to him. Completely, entirely steady. "I want to tell you what Caleb and Jolene were doing while I was crawling on that mountain road, because weeks later, when the investigation records came in, this is what the evidence showed. I did not know any of it in the moment, but I know it now, piece by piece, the way you assemble a picture you were not there to see. I want to be clear about that, because I am not a man who claims to know things he did not witness." What I am about to tell you came together over the weeks that followed from the credit card statement that showed up in discovery from the location data on Jolene's phone that the sheriff's department pulled as part of the investigation from the restaurant's own records when the deputy subpoenaed them. But the picture those pieces made when I finally saw it whole was one I have not been able to stop thinking about since. While I was face down on that road, while I was reaching into that drainage ditch for crutches that the current had already taken, Caleb and Jolene were 40 minutes away at a place called Ridgeline Grill, a steakhouse on the county highway that Caleb had always liked because it had the kind of lighting and menu pricing that made him feel like he had arrived somewhere. They ordered at 9:14 according to the receipt. 2 steaks, a bottle of wine, and appetizer. They were there for just under 2 hours. I have thought about that a great deal. 2 hours. I have tried to imagine what a person talks about over a meal they sit down to 40 minutes after leaving their father to die on a mountain. I have tried, and I have not been able to get there. Not really, because there is a version of a person that would do that, and I do not have whatever it takes to fully inhabit that version. But I know what the evidence showed, and the evidence showed that neither of them made a single phone call between leaving that road and arriving at the restaurant. Not to emergency services. Not to me. Not to anyone. What they made, according to the phone records, was 2 texts between themselves in that window. The content of those texts I will not repeat here because they became part of the case file, and I have chosen to leave them there. But I will tell you that when Deputy Briggs read them to me, I had to put my hand flat on the kitchen table to keep myself steady, and I did not fully trust my voice for a good 30 seconds after. Hatch, sitting across from me when Briggs read them, said nothing. But I saw his hand close around his coffee mug like he was trying to keep something inside it from getting out. They finished their meal at 11:06. Paid with Caleb's card, the one linked to the joint account he had added his name to 6 weeks before the account that had my name on it first. They tipped 20%. I know that because it was on the receipt. I do not know what to do with the detail of the 20% tip, except to say that it is the kind of detail that stays with you in a way that the larger facts somehow do not. They pulled into my driveway at 11:22, according to the GPS data from Caleb's truck. By that point, I had been home for nearly 2 hours. Deputy Briggs had already come and gone. Warren Stills had a voicemail from me waiting for him, and I was sitting in my recliner with every light in the house burning and a cup of coffee going cold on the side table, and Hatch was in the chair across from me. He had refused to leave until we knew how the night would end, and I had stopped arguing about it. And we were talking about nothing in particular about the mountains, about what survey work had looked like in the 80s, about a creek on his property that flooded every spring in the particular way that 2 men talk when they are waiting for something and have agreed, without saying so, not to talk about what they are waiting for. I heard the engine first. That specific engine, the particular idol of Caleb's truck. A sound I had heard pull into this driveway 100 times over the years, in 100 different contexts, on Christmas mornings and birthday dinners and ordinary Tuesday evenings, coming up the street and slowing and turning in. My hands tightened on the arms of my chair. "They're here," I said. Hatch set his mug down. He straightened in his chair, both feet on the floor, and he looked at me with those steady, dark eyes, and he said, "You ready?" I thought about the road. I thought about the gravel against my palms and the cold water in the ditch and the sound of those crutches hitting the current and Caleb's voice saying nobody's coming to save you. I thought about the 2 hours between that moment and this one and everything that had happened inside them. "I've been ready since they drove away," I said. 2 car doors, then their voices, and this is the part that hit me somewhere. I was not expecting their voices were easy, relaxed. The voices of people coming home after a pleasant evening, not the voices of people coming home to face anything at all. I could hear them talking as they came up the front walk, some loose, careless back and forth that I could not make out word for word, but did not need to. The tone was enough. They were still mid-conversation when the front door swung open. Caleb walked in first, and I watched his face clear as anything in the full light of every lamp in that room at the exact moment he saw me sitting in my chair. The color left Caleb's face in the space of about 1 second. I watched it happen, watched the easy, relaxed expression he had been wearing coming up that front walk drain out of him. Like water out of a cracked glass, replaced by something I can only describe as the look of a man whose entire model of the world has just been proven wrong. His mouth opened. It closed. His eyes went to Hatch, sitting in the chair across from me, and then back to me, and in that half-second of calculation, I could see every version of every explanation he was running and discarding. Jolene came in behind him. She saw me and she did something I had not expected. Her hand shot out and grabbed the doorframe, steadying herself like the floor had moved. Her purse slid off her shoulder and hit the floor, and she did not reach for it. I looked at both of them. I took my time. And then I said, "I have a surprise for you." Caleb's mouth started moving before his brain had fully caught up. "Dad, oh my God. Dad, we came back for you. We felt terrible. We turned around. We were on our way back up there." I let him go. I let him run through it the way a man does when he is buying time, the words tumbling out faster and faster, each one built on the one before it, the whole structure getting more elaborate by the second. Jolene said nothing. She had stepped into the room and picked up her purse, and she stood very still near the door, and I noticed that her eyes were not on me. They were moving to Hatch, to the phone on the side table, to the notepad Deputy Briggs had left on the arm of my chair when he went back out to his cruiser. She was doing arithmetic, faster than Caleb was. She always had been faster than Caleb. When he finally ran down, I said, "You were at Ridgeline Grill." The room went very quiet. "Your card was charged at 9:14, I said. "You were there for just under 2 hours. The GPS on your truck shows you arriving there 40 minutes after you left that road and leaving just before 11. I kept my voice level. I kept my hands loose in my lap. I had spent the last 2 hours getting to this moment, and I was not going to spend it shouting. "You did not come back for me, Caleb. You went to dinner." Caleb's jaw worked. "That's Dad. That information isn't how do you even—" "This is Colonel Dwight Hatchett," I said. "He found me on Route 9 approximately 25 minutes after you drove away, in the drainage ditch, reaching for my crutches." I paused to let that land. "He brought me home. He gave his statement to Deputy Briggs 2 hours ago. I gave mine. Both of them are on record." Caleb turned to Hatch with the desperate pivot of a man looking for a different audience. "Sir, I don't know what my father told you, but this is a family situation, and there are things you don't understand about the full, I know what I found on that road." Hatch's voice was quiet and complete, and left absolutely no room for anything else. He did not raise it. He did not need to. Caleb turned back to me. His face had gone through several phases in the last 2 minutes. Shock calculation, the attempt at charm, and now something rawer and less controlled. The look of a man who has run out of the tools he normally uses and does not know what to pick up next. His voice cracked when he said, "Dad, come on. Come on, you're not really going to—" "There are also documents," I said. "A power of attorney with a signature that is not mine on page 2. A beneficiary change on my savings account with a signature that is not mine. A property valuation request you made on my house without my knowledge or consent." I watched his face as I said each one. Warren Stills is going to look at all of it Monday morning, but I don't think either of us needs to wait until Monday to know what he's going to find. Jolene made a sound, then not a cry. Not quite, but a sharp exhale that was the closest I had ever heard from her to something uncontrolled. She pressed her lips together immediately after and got herself back, but for just that 1 second I saw through the composure she had been wearing since the day she walked into my house. And what was underneath it was not remorse. It was the face of a woman recalculating. Caleb took a step toward me and his voice dropped low and urgent. Dad, listen to me. Whatever you think you found, whatever this man told you, we can talk about this. Just the two of us. We can figure this out. We don't need to involve Caleb. My voice stopped him where he stood. I had not raised it. I did not need to raise it. You told me nobody was coming to save me. You said it standing over me in the rain on that road. My throat ached as I said it, and I let it ache because there was no version of this that was not going to hurt. I want you to understand that I heard every word. I am going to be hearing those words for the rest of my life. I held his gaze steady. Nobody came to save me, except the one man from my entire life who never once left one of his people behind. And he was there. And here we are. The headlights of a car swept across the front window. Jolene saw it first. She turned her head toward the window, and I watched her face go the particular shade that faces go when the last possible exit has just closed. Caleb spun around. Through the glass, he could see the cruiser pulling into the driveway, the light bar dark, but the engine unmistakable. He turned back to me and his voice came out thin and desperate, a voice I had not heard from him since he was a teenager, caught in something he could not talk his way out of. Dad, please, just wait. Just wait, okay? Just give me a chance to... It's too late for that, I said. And I meant it without anger, which surprised me. I had thought there would be more anger. What there was instead was something sadder and more final, the feeling of a door closing that had been open your entire life, and knowing that this time it was not going to swing back. The knock at the door was not loud. Deputies who come to a house the morning after do not need to knock loud. Deputy Briggs had called ahead 8:15 before Caleb and Jolene were fully awake, and said he had some follow-up and needed everyone present. The knock he gave my front door was 3 measured raps, unhurried, authoritative, the kind that says, I am here and I am not leaving without what I came for. Caleb got to the door before anyone else could move. He pulled it open, and I watched him shift into the version of himself he deployed. When he needed something from someone, shoulders back, voice modulated, hand extended for a handshake that Deputy Briggs did not take. Officer, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding here. Caleb said, his voice back to that smooth, practiced register that had fooled me for years. My father had a fall. He was disoriented and we were on our way back to get him when he apparently managed to get a ride somehow. This is all just a very unfortunate miscommunication within our family, and I really think if we could just... Mr. Mercer. Deputy Briggs's voice was pleasant and absolute. I'm going to need you to step back inside, please. Caleb stepped back. He had no choice. Deputy Briggs came through the door and stood in my living room in his uniform with his notepad out, and he looked at each of us in turn, the way a man does when he is taking inventory, and then he looked at Caleb specifically and said, I need to ask you a few questions about your whereabouts this evening. Of course, Caleb said immediately, eagerly. Absolutely, we were... Before you answer, Deputy Briggs said, and his voice stayed pleasant. Stayed level, stayed completely unmoved by Caleb's eagerness. I want to make sure you understand that we have already corroborated several elements of Mr. Mercer's statement. I'd encourage you to be accurate. Something shifted in Caleb's posture. Just slightly. Just enough. Mr. Mercer filed a report last night and we've been working since this morning. Deputy Briggs said, reading from his notepad without looking up. We've obtained your vehicle's GPS records. They show a stop of approximately 9 minutes on Route 9 Mountain Road at 8:47 last evening, at the coordinates matching the location Mr. Mercer described, and where Colonel Hatchett states he found him. Following that stop, the GPS recorded this vehicle traveling south on Route 9, then east on County 14, before arriving at the Ridgeline Grill at 9:11 p.m. He looked up. You were there until approximately 10:58. Your card was charged at 11:06. The sound Caleb made was not quite a word. It was the sound a man makes when the version of events he was planning to offer has just been taken off the table before he could set it down. We've also pulled traffic camera footage from the Route 9 mountain corridor, Deputy Briggs continued. State installed those cameras 2 years ago after a series of weather-related accidents on that stretch. The footage confirms your vehicle stopping at 8:46 and leaving at 8:55, and shows Mr. Mercer on the roadway after your vehicle departs. He closed his notepad. I also have a witness statement from Colonel Hatchett, describing the condition in which he found your father, the location, and the time. That statement is consistent with Mr. Mercer's account in every particular. Caleb's hands came up, palms out, the gesture of a man trying to stop something with his bare hands. Okay, look, I lost my temper. I know that. That was wrong. I know it was wrong, but it wasn't. I didn't intend for anything to actually happen to him. It was an argument that escalated, and I made a terrible mistake, and I want to make that right. I genuinely want to make that right. If we could just... Caleb. My voice came out quiet and tired and completely certain. Stop. He looked at me. And for just a moment, one single unguarded moment, the calculation and the performance and the smooth, practiced surface of him dropped away entirely, and what was underneath was something I recognized from a very long time ago. A boy who had done something he could not undo and was only now understanding the full weight of it. My chest ached with a dull, deep throb that had nothing to do with my ankle, but I did not look away. And I did not take it back. Deputy Briggs stepped forward. Mr. Caleb Mercer, I'm placing you under arrest for reckless endangerment and abandonment of a vulnerable adult. These are felony charges under state law. He produced the handcuffs with the practiced ease of someone who has done this many times, and he moved behind Caleb, and he said, "Please put your hands behind your back." Caleb's shoulders dropped. The fight went out of him in one long exhale, and he put his hands behind his back, and the cuffs went on with 2 clicks that sounded very loud in my living room. He did not resist. He did not shout. He just stood there with his wrists bound and his head slightly bowed, and then he said very quietly, "Dad." I did not answer. Not because I had nothing to say, but because everything I might have said had already been said, and none of it had mattered until tonight, and I was not going to spend the words I had left on a moment that was already finished. Deputy Briggs guided him toward the door. Caleb went. At the threshold, he turned his head back once, and I watched them go down my front walk to the cruiser, and I watched the door of the cruiser close, and I watched the headlights come on, and the car back out of my driveway and pull away down Clover Mill Road until the taillights were gone. Jolene stood behind me to my left. She had not moved from her spot near the window through any of it. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest, and her jaw was set, and her eyes were dry. When the sound of the cruiser had faded entirely, she said in a voice stripped of every layer of warmth she had ever pointed at me, What happens now? I turned to look at her. You have until dark tomorrow to be out of this house, I said. Everything in it belongs to me. You take what you brought in and nothing else. Her nostrils flared. For 1 second, I thought she was going to argue. Then she picked up her purse from the floor and walked down the hall toward the bedroom, and her footsteps were hard and deliberate on the hardwood, and I heard the bedroom door close with a firmness that stopped just short of a slam. Hatch looked at me from across the room. You doing all right? He asked. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I don't know yet, I said. Ask me in the morning. He nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer. I'll put the kettle on, he said, and got up and went to the kitchen, and I sat in my chair in my lit-up house and I breathed. I did not sleep that night. Hatch stayed until well past 2 in the morning. When I finally told him to go home to rest, that I was fine and had everything I needed, he did not simply accept it. He pushed back for a few minutes, not with any heat in his voice, just with that quiet, measured persistence that was as natural to him as breathing. Then he looked at my face, and whatever he found there must have been enough, because he reached for his jacket and said, I'll be back Monday. You call me if anything changes before then. It wasn't a question. I told him I would call. I meant it. I sat in my chair through the rest of the night, and into the early morning. The house had gone quiet, in a way it hadn't been quiet in a very long time. Not the muffled, uneasy quiet of a place holding its breath, but something clean and honest. I had not realized until it was gone how much I had been bracing myself against a certain undertone that had lived in these walls for months. Sometime around 5 o'clock, I heard Jolene in the back bedroom, the sound of drawers being pulled open and pushed shut, the rustling of things being gathered and packed. I did not go back there. I stayed in my chair and drank the last of the tea Hatch had made for me before he left, and I watched the sky outside the front window move slowly through its stages, black, then gray, then the pale and fragile blue of early Sunday morning. Warren Stills called at 7:45. The moment he spoke, I could hear in his voice that he had listened to my voicemail carefully and already understood this was not a routine matter. Tell me where you are and what you have, he said, bypassing any preamble. I'm at home, I said. I have the originals. Can you meet me this morning? 8:30 on, he said. My office. Bring everything. Hatch picked me up at 8. I had not asked him to come, he was simply there when I walked out the front door, his truck idling in the driveway, as though he had not driven home 5 hours earlier. I climbed in without a word. There are things between people that don't require explanation. Warren Stills had practiced law for 37 years, and his face had long since trained itself out of showing surprise at whatever a client placed before him. But when I laid out the documents one by one, the power of attorney with the signature on page 2 that was not mine, the beneficiary change form, the property valuation letter, I watched something move behind his eyes. Not surprise. Something sharper and more deliberate than that. Walk me through each one, he said. So I did. He listened without interrupting his pen, moving in a handwriting so small it was nearly impossible to read, pausing only to ask precise questions when he needed precise answers. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at the documents spread across his desk for a long moment. The signature on this POA is not yours, he said. No, I said. I've had your signature on documents for 20 years, Russ. I know it well. He pressed his finger to the page. This is a close imitation. It is not yours. He set his pen down. This is forgery, which makes the POA void, which makes everything done under its authority void. My hands tightened on my knees. How quickly can we move on this, Today, he said. This morning, right now. He was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling the bank first. We freeze the joint account, pending investigation document, the unauthorized beneficiary change, and initiate recovery on any funds that were transferred out. He paused. How much did he manage to take? I don't have the full figure yet. We'll find it. He said it the way a man speaks when he has found things out before, and has no doubt he will again. After the bank, we rewrite your will entirely. Today, before you leave this office. He looked at me directly. Are you certain about all of this? Completely, I said. He nodded, picked up the phone, and went to work. I sat across from him and listened as he methodically dismantled phone call by phone call everything that Caleb and Jolene had spent months carefully constructing. I will tell you honestly, there was almost no satisfaction in it. It was necessary. It was right. But there is nothing that feels like winning when you are sitting across a desk, watching a lawyer undo the damage your own son has done to you. It feels like surgery. It is clean, and it is necessary, and it is deeply, quietly awful. We were in that office for 3 hours. By the time we left, the power of attorney had been voided, the joint account frozen, the beneficiary change flagged for reversal, and my will had been completely rewritten. Warren's paralegal as witness, a notary brought in from the neighboring office. Caleb and Jolene's names did not appear anywhere in the new document. Hatch drove me home. Jolene's car was already gone from the driveway. I went inside. The house had that particular feeling of a space that had been recently vacated, not fully empty, but subtly altered, rearranged in ways I would likely keep discovering for days. I walked through the hallway toward the living room and stopped. The shelf above the fireplace was bare. Of course it was. The brass clock, the wedding photograph, the ceramic vase we had brought back from Quebec, the small lacquered music box, none of those things were coming back. Jolene's departure had not changed that. Warren's phone calls had not changed it. Caleb's arrest had not changed it. That loss existed somewhere beyond the reach of lawyers and legal documents and sheriff's deputies in a place where none of them could follow. I stood in front of that fireplace, and the tears that came were nothing like the ones that had broken loose on the mountain road with Hatch's shoulder pressed against mine. These were slow. These were the kind of tears that a man allows himself only when he is finally somewhere safe enough to feel the full weight of what has been taken from him, not just the objects, but what they stood for. I put one hand on the mantel, and I let it happen. I cried for Lorraine's things. I cried for the 43 years those things represented. I cried for the son I had raised, who had turned out to be capable of this. I cried for all of it all at once. Hatch came in from the kitchen. He had made coffee while I was standing there. I could smell it before I heard him. He set a mug on the side table next to my chair without a word, then crossed the room and sat down across from me. He did not speak. There was nothing to say, and he understood that, and that understanding was exactly what I needed. After a while, I sat down. I picked up the mug. The coffee was the right temperature. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." "You'd have done the same for me," Hatch said. I thought about that honestly. "I'd like to think so," I said. "I know so," he said, and the way he said it made argument impossible, so I let it stand. 6 months is a long time. Long enough for a surgically reconstructed ankle to heal completely. Long enough for a man to walk out his own front door on 2 feet without giving it a second thought, which is something I had not been entirely sure I would ever take for granted again. Long enough, too, for a court date to be set and honored. Caleb appeared before a judge in August, and I am going to tell you exactly what happened there plainly, and without any embellishment in either direction. He pleaded guilty to reckless endangerment and elder abandonment. The forgery charge was reduced as part of the plea agreement. He received a suspended sentence, 3 years of probation, a substantial fine, 200 hours of community service, and a court order requiring full restitution of the funds he had moved out of my accounts. I did not attend the hearing. Warren Stills went on my behalf and called me afterward with the full account. I listened, thanked him, and hung up. Then I went out to my porch and sat down with a cup of coffee in the September afternoon light and thought for a long time about what justice actually looks and feels like when you are the one it is meant to serve. What I concluded was that it looks considerably smaller in real life than it does in your head, smaller than the version you imagine when you are lying on a mountain road in the dark, not entirely certain that anyone is going to come. The real thing is paperwork and a courtroom and a phone call. It is not a reckoning. It is a settlement, but it was real, and it held. And in the end, that mattered more than the size of it. Hatch and I kept up our coffee routine without interruption twice a week, every week, Tuesday mornings and Friday afternoons, rotating between my kitchen and his. The rhythm of it settled into place with the ease of something that had always been there and simply needed to be found. He still called me Russ. I had been calling him Hatch for so long, I couldn't have said with any confidence when that had started, or whether there had ever been a time before it. We talked about everything and nothing in particular, about the creek on his property that had flooded badly in July, about the part-time survey work I was considering picking up, now that my ankle was reliable again, about the particular and well-known unreliability of October weather in the mountains. Ordinary conversation. The kind that accumulates quietly into something that looks after enough time has passed like a life. We did not talk much about Caleb. There was not a great deal left to say about Caleb that hadn't already been said or resolved, or simply set aside in the place where things go when they are finished. It was a Friday afternoon in late October when I heard the knock at the door. I was in the kitchen with the kettle on waiting for Hatch. After 6 months of Tuesday mornings and Friday afternoons, I knew his knock the way you know a voice 3 raps evenly spaced, no hesitation in them. This knock was not that. It was slower, softer, with gaps between each rap that told you something about the person on the other side. It was the knock of someone who was not sure they had any right to be standing on that porch at all. I walked to the door and opened it. Caleb was standing there. He was thinner than the last time I had seen him, which was the night he stood in this same living room with Deputy Briggs at his back. The expensive watch was gone from his wrist. He was wearing a jacket I didn't recognize, plain fabric worn at both elbows, nothing like the clothes he used to wear when he was performing the particular version of himself he'd always wanted the world to accept as real. He looked in a way I hadn't seen in longer than I could clearly remember, like himself, like the actual person underneath all the years of wanting and maneuvering. Like the boy. His eyes were red at the edges. He had been crying recently, or was very close to it, and he was using considerable effort to hold himself together. I could see how much that effort was costing him. "Dad," he said. His voice broke on that single syllable the way a voice does when it has been held under pressure for too long. I had to come. I had to say it to your face." He swallowed hard, visibly working to steady himself. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't come anywhere close to fixing anything. But I needed you to hear it from me directly, not through a lawyer or a document or a court proceeding. I needed to stand here in front of you and say it." His jaw tightened against the emotion that kept trying to push its way through. "I'm sorry, Dad. For all of it. Every part of it." I stood in the doorway, and I looked at my son. I took my time about it. I looked at the redness around his eyes and the worn elbows of that unfamiliar jacket and the bare wrist where the watch used to sit. I looked at his face not the way I had been looking at it for the months before that night on the mountain road, when I had been so occupied with trying to see what I hoped was there, that I couldn't see what was actually there. I looked at it honestly, the way you can only look at something once you have stopped wanting it to be other than it is. What was actually there was a man who had done a terrible thing, and who understood that fully and was not trying to talk around it, or minimize it, or reframe it into something more forgivable. He was simply standing there with it. That was new. That was as best I could reckon the first genuinely new thing I had seen from him in years. "I know you are," I said. He looked up at me. I want you to hear something clearly, Caleb." My voice came out steady. Not cold. There is a real difference between steady and cold, and I want that distinction to be understood. "I have forgiven you. I want you to know that, and I want you to believe it because I mean it. Not because what you did was minor, and not because I have forgotten a single moment of it, but because I am 71 years old and I do not have enough years left to spend carrying what you left me with on that mountain road. I forgave you so that I could put it down. I did it for myself." I held his gaze and did not look away. "But there is something else I need you to understand." He nodded just barely. The nod of a man who can already sense the shape of what is coming and is preparing himself to receive it. "Forgiveness does not reopen closed doors," I said. The words landed. I watched them land. I saw his shoulders drop by a fraction, saw his eyes go bright and wet and full, saw him press his lips together hard and work through it. He nodded again, and this time it was a different kind of nod, not bracing, but accepting. The nod of someone who has been told a hard and honest thing and has recognized it as true, even though the truth of it costs him something real. "Take care of yourself," I said. "I mean that genuinely." "Yes, sir," he said. His voice had gone very quiet. It had gone very young. I looked at him for one more moment. This person who had come into the world 6 pounds and 9 ounces, placed in my arms in a hospital room 42 years ago. And then I stepped back from the doorway and I closed the door. Not forcefully, not in anger. Simply closed it, the latch clicking softly and firmly into place, the way a door closes when the matter on the other side of it is finished. I stood in the front hallway, with my hand still resting on the door, and my eyes burning and my chest full of something I could not name, precisely something that was not grief and not relief, but lived in the territory between those two things, and partook of both of them. Then from outside, I heard Hatch's truck turn into the driveway. A moment later came the knock I recognized, 3 raps even and unhesitating. I breathed in. I breathed out. I walked to the kitchen and took 2 mugs down from the cabinet and called toward the front of the house. "It's open, Hatch." The door opened. His boots crossed the hardwood floor. "Who was that pulling out of the drive?" he asked. "Nobody," I said. "You want it strong today?" "Always," he said. He pulled out his chair and sat down. And that, I believe, is where this story properly ends. Not with a verdict, not with a signed document, not with a door slamming shut in fury, but with 2 old men and a pot of coffee on a Friday afternoon in October, in a house that belongs to me, in a life that belongs to me, on a day that is entirely and quietly and fully my own. There is one thing I keep coming back to even now on quiet Friday afternoons, with coffee going warm in my hands and Hatch sitting across from me. I let it go too far. I saw the signs, the locks, the mail, the documents, the empty shelf, and I kept finding reasons to explain them away, because believing the worst about the people you love is one of the hardest things a human being can do. So I want to say this plainly to anyone out there who recognizes any piece of this story in their own life. Do not wait as long as I waited. Do not let love make you blind to what is actually being done to you. Protect yourself, not out of suspicion, but out of self-respect. I also believe, and I say this as a man who does not wear his faith on his sleeve, that God puts the right person on the right road at the right moment. I cannot explain Hatch being on that mountain that night in any other way that satisfies me. Some things are simply grace. This is what revenge stories family members never talk about openly. The real damage is not the money, not the house, not the legal documents. It is the trust. That is the thing that does not come back. Revenge stories, family wounds run deeper than any court can reach, and family justice, when it finally comes, feels less like winning and more like surviving. But surviving, I have decided, is enough. More than enough. If any part of this story sat with you, if you have ever been made to feel like a burden by someone you gave everything to, I would genuinely like to hear about it in the comments. And if you believe in family justice the way I do, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. There may be someone in your life who is still waiting on that road. Subscribe and stay with me. The next story is already waiting. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. It means more than you know. A note before you go: the stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted for the purpose of exploring real human experiences and values. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, I respect that completely. Feel free to find what speaks to you. But if you are staying, I am glad to have you here.